Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So the first time I met Brahmananda, he was now a sannyasi, and I was living in Los Angeles temple. He came, and one of my services at that time in Los Angeles temple in 1975 was to get the maha after the offerings, transfer all the maha, wash all the plates, and bring it out to the devotees. That was my service. It's a nice service. All the devotees like you very much. So about noon, the temple president called me into his office just before the Raj Bhog Arti. And the GBC was there, Jayatirtha, temple president was Tulsi Das, and Brahmananda was there. And he introduced me to Brahmananda, and he said, when the maha comes off the altar, you bring here for Brahmananda to enjoy the Mahaprasad of Rukmini Yorkadish. So I was very happy to do that, because that was my service. I always did that. So the offerings came off, I transferred everything, and then washed all the Krishna's plates and everything, put them away nicely, and then made a nice plate for Brahmananda. And I brought in this plate for Brahmananda. Brahmananda looked at me and he said, "What is this?" And the GBC says, "Bring the whole offering." I had only brought one plate. It was a big plate. Anyway, they chastised me. I ran back, got the whole offering and brought it in to Brahmananda. Because he was not only had a big body, but he had a big appetite. So that was my first meeting with Brahmananda. He chastised me that I didn't bring enough prasad. What is this? I thought I was doing the right thing, bringing him the best of the maha, on a nice plate. But I didn't bring him 100% everything, which meant 0 for everybody else. But anyway, the GBC told me to go back and bring the whole plate, everything for Brahmananda, so I did. So that was my first experience with Brahmananda. Then my next experience with Brahmananda, because a few months later, I came to India. I came here to Vrindavan in 1975. I did a little traveling. When it became too cold here in December, I was freezing. Then I went with Lokanath, who had come in December 3rd, 3 of my godbrothers took sannyas. It was Prituputra, it was Sridhar, and Lokanath. They all became Maharajas. So then Lokanath Maharaj, he wanted a brahmachari assistant to go back to Bombay. So he requested me. So I immediately said yes, because I knew that Bombay was south. So we got to Bombay, and there I am. I'm Lokanath Maharaj's first brahmachari assistant. And he's going around every day in the center of the town making life members, speaking in Hindi. So all I did was carry the bag, carry the briefcase, where he had photos and a little Mahaprasad. And then he could say, yes, it's the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Here's a boy from America. But a few weeks after that, I got jaundice, so I couldn't even do that seva. But then, from the Mayapur festival, 1976, I came back to Mayapur, and I saw Brahmananda again. And I didn't have that much interaction with Brahmananda because he was very famous, big devotee. and I was nobody, just some young brahmachari. But years later, I wrote this book, Radha Damodar Vilas. And in this book, there's an incident with Brahmananda, Gargamuni, Vishnujan Swami, and Subal Swami. And this was in 1970. Prabhupada noticed in 1970 that things were not going well in his ISKCON society. The devotees were not attentive. Things were lackadaisical. He had come to take darshan and came down for the Guru, the Guru Puja Arti. What do you call it? Anyway, Thakur Darshan at 7 o'clock. And he was waiting in line there to get the Charnamrit, and he tasted it. Ooh, someone had put salt instead of sugar. So he was very upset. And Prabhupada realized he was being minimized. And so he became very upset and very disturbed that he had become minimized. So then he decided to give sannyas to 4 devotees, 4 senior-most devotees. That was Brahmananda, Gargamuni, Subal, and Vishnujan Swami. This was in the summer of 1970. And then he sent them out traveling. So they were traveling around America, and they came to New Vrindavan for Janmashtami and the Vyas Puja. And at that time, Brahmananda and Gargamuni were preaching to everyone that we have minimized Prabhupada. We didn't realize that Prabhupada is actually God. He's actually an incarnation of Krishna. And they were preaching like that. And the devotees were confused. And so what happened was they contacted Prabhupada, and Prabhupada said, this is bogus, this is Mayavad philosophy. And he expelled them. They're now, you cannot stay in the society, you're excommunicated. So when I interviewed Brahmananda about that incident, because people want to know what really happened, and it's never been spoken about in our movement, but you were there, you were chastised by Prabhupada, and then he brought you back. So what really happened? He said, we made a big mistake and we minimized Prabhupada. And then we made an even bigger mistake, we maximized Prabhupada, saying that he was God. So we have to understand the Guru Tattva. This is the Antarjatik Krishna Bhavnamrita Sangha. It's not the Guru Bhavnamrita Sangha, it's the Krishna Bhavnamrita Sangha. So we glorify our Guru because he's bringing us to Krishna. It's not that the Guru takes the place of Krishna. So Brahmananda and I, we were discussing like this. And we should understand, just like this morning's verse, in the shloka it said that Mother Yashoda did not understand who Krishna was, and she didn't know what his power was. So when I first met Brahmananda, I didn't know who he was, and I didn't know what his power was. Otherwise, I would have brought the whole plate. But I only brought a portion, and so he chastised me. But later on, we understood that the Guru is worshipped because he's bringing us to Krishna. That's what his glorification is, not that he takes the place of Krishna. So this is the Antarashtriya Krishna Bhavnamrita Sangha. This is the Sangha of people who have bhavana, feelings of love. And they're experiencing the Amrit, Bhavnamrit. They're experiencing the Amrit of that bhavana for Krishna, Krishna Bhavnamrit. And sometimes, so Brahmananda had replaced Krishna Bhavnamrit with Prabhupada Bhavnamrit and said Prabhupada was a god. And that was a big aparad. Prabhupada said this is Mayavad philosophy, and those 4 sannyasis are excommunicated for a small period of time. They had to prove themselves. So they could not go to any ISKCON temple. It was in Detroit temple that Bhagavan Das, who was the temple president, had called Prabhupada, said, the 4 sannyasis are here. They were the ones preaching that you're God. Prabhupada said they cannot stay, they have to leave. So he asked them to leave. And so they had no money, and they thought, well, we're sannyasis. Sannyasi means simple. You give up everything, you have nothing. You only have 3 things: your mind, your words, and your actions dedicated to Krishna. So they decided to walk to a town, Ann Arbor, 60 miles from Detroit. And in that town was a huge university with 40,000 students. So they said, let's walk there, and then we can preach to these people. So even though they were excommunicated, weren't allowed to stay in any ISKCON temple, they were dedicated to the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So they walked to that place, and they ended up meeting somebody, got a room, and then they preached. They would go in a grassy area on the university. Vishnu Jan Maharaj would lead a kirtan, and then Brahmananda would speak. And different people became very interested. And one of those devotees, one of those students that became interested, he became a devotee by association with those 4 sannyasis who had been excommunicated from ISKCON. They were no longer part of ISKCON. And that devotee was Indrajumna Maharaj. Today he's Indrajumna Maharaj. So it doesn't matter what our position is, we should understand what is Guru Tattva. We should understand what is Vishnu Tattva. We should understand our position as Das, 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 Anudas. And whatever our situation is in life, whether it's favorable or unfavorable, whether we're accepted in ISKCON or we're rejected in ISKCON, doesn't matter. Our whole reason for living is to serve Krishna in Deshkalpatra, in any time, any place, any circumstance. So we learned that from this experience with Brahmananda and the other sannyasis. So I can see my time is going. So thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki, Brahmananda Swami ki jai.
There were some things that only Brahmananda was able to do for Srila Prabhupada. And Brahmananda realized that at the very end of Srila Prabhupada's presence with us. We all know that Brahmananda was the biggest devotee in ISKCON. And this all started at the very beginning when Brahmananda first became a devotee at 26 2nd Avenue. He went to Prabhupada with the question that tomorrow I start a job, but I want to just join you. I want to give up my job and become a devotee. And when Prabhupada heard that he had a job, Prabhupada was very happy. He said, well, to run our institution, we need money. So you should work and give that money to Krishna. And Brahmananda was confused. He said, well, how do I give money to Krishna? And Prabhupada told him, well, don't worry, you give the money to me and I'll give it to Krishna. So from the very beginning of Brahmananda's association with Prabhupada, he was helping Prabhupada more than anybody else. He would give Prabhupada $100 bills, which were just unseen in those days. Then Prabhupada made him the first temple president at 26 2nd Avenue. And then Prabhupada, there was only one sannyasi in the movement at the time, that was Kirtanananda. And then Prabhupada made a second sannyasi. By 1970, when Prabhupada made these 4 sannyasis, they started to travel and preach all over, aside from the small incident at New Vrindavan and then their resurrection. But as soon as there was a next big challenge, and that happened here in India, because after this incident when Prabhupada felt that he was being minimized, he came back to India then and started big Pandal programs here. And at one of these Pando programs, an Arya Samaji challenged Prabhupada that you've come back here to India to preach, but we already know everything. Why don't you take your disciples and go where they really need to know about Krishna, like the Muslim countries? Why don't you go to Pakistan? That was the challenge. Prabhupada said, oh, you're challenging me? He said, yes, I'm challenging you. Why don't you send your people to Pakistan? So the next day, Prabhupada sent letters to Brahmananda and to Gargamuni, they were traveling and preaching in America. He told Brahmananda, you go to West Pakistan, and he told Gargamuni, you go to East Pakistan. And they immediately did it. They didn't even think, and by then it was 1971, it was when the war was starting between the Indo-Pakistani war. They just went there and started preaching. Brahmananda would get spit on, he would get pushed, he would get threatened that they were going to stab him in the back. Finally he wrote in the newspaper it came that 4 Hare Krishna devotees had been killed. And Prabhupada was in such anxiety about his disciples who he had sent. Each one had a brahmachari assistant at the time. So finally, Brahmananda wrote to Prabhupada, can I come back because the war's going on? Brahmananda Prabhupada sent a telegram, come immediately, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami. So it was impossible to get out of Pakistan at the time because the war was going on. Somehow he made it to Bombay. Prabhupada embraced him, and just like a little child, like in this verse, after embracing Brahmananda, he was feeling all of his body to make sure he was all right. This was the love that Prabhupada had for Brahmananda. Then many times Prabhupada would mention that Brahmananda was the first devotee to dance at Tompkins Square Park. He and Achyutananda, Prabhupada would say, he and Achyutananda would hold hands and they would dance. And there's a picture in the New York Times of the 2 devotees dancing. So when Prabhupada saw that picture in the article in New York Times, he said, now our Hare Krishna movement has become established because New York Times, they've had a picture and an article about us. So just like Vakeshwar Pandit, he was the #1 dancer for Lord Chaitanya, Kirtaniya and dancer. He would dance up to 72 hours. So Brahmananda was the first dancer for Srila Prabhupada. And then when Prabhupada was winding up his pastimes, Brahmananda came to see Prabhupada in London. And there Prabhupada was too weak at the time. They would just bring him down on his palanquin to the temple room. And Brahmananda would lead the dancing. He would take his danda and put it horizontal. And the way we had learned how to dance then in India was this temple, it used to be like an ocean with the devotees going back and forth up to Srila Prabhupada, and then Prabhupada would throw the flowers and everyone would hit the ceiling. And so Brahmananda knew that form of dancing from India. So with his danda, he was controlling the devotees to go forwards to Prabhupada and then to go backwards to Prabhupada. The whole ocean of devotees were moving to and from Prabhupada dancing. And then when Prabhupada realized that his health was deteriorating, he decided to come to Bombay. Brahmananda followed him to Bombay. And then finally Prabhupada decided to come back to Vrindavan to end his pastimes. So in those days, the trains were very different from what they are now. They were steam trains. You'd sit in the train, you'd come out completely black, totally, It didn't matter if you had the windows open or closed. And to get into the trains, there was a 2-foot gap and then 3 steps before you got up. So they decided that Brahmananda should carry Prabhupada into the train. So he had to carry Prabhupada so gently, but he got 1 foot up on the 2-foot, that first step, and he couldn't make it anymore. So all the devotees from the back were pushing him to get him up to the stair. So with their help, he was able to bring Prabhupada in, just like a little baby, holding him in his arms, and then bring him into the first class cabin and put him there on the bench, which was made into a bed, and very gently to make sure that nothing happened to Prabhupada so that he wouldn't be hurt. Before that, there was the Mauritius incident. Prabhupada had been traveling and preaching in Africa. He was invited to Mauritius. The Prime Minister gave him a car, gave him nice facilities. Prabhupada decided to take it, because they had the car, he decided to take a visit of the whole island. It's only 40 kilometers. As they were driving, a little Volkswagen came head-on collision into them, and Pushta Krishna went through the windshield, the driver went through the windshield, and Prabhupada had just put his cane in front of him. So Prabhupada, he got a gash on his leg, and Brahmananda was sitting next to him. And Brahmananda, when he saw that Prabhupada was bleeding, he just instantaneously, without even thinking, he just embraced Prabhupada to protect him. So Prabhupada said that Brahmananda had saved his life. And also when Prabhupada had his stroke in 1967, it was Brahmananda and Gargamuni who just took him out of the hospital. And therefore you'll hear later from Mahadevi, Prabhupada promised Brahmananda that you'll never have to go to the hospital. So that's actually what happened in his final pastimes. So then Brahmananda came from Bombay with Prabhupada in 1977, and when they reached the gate here, again Brahmananda picked him up, carried him into his room where Prabhupada announced to the devotees that he had come here to leave his body. And the pastimes didn't end then. They went on until Prabhupada finally left his body. And then when we were establishing the Samadhi here, it took until 1983 to install Prabhupada's deity as we see now, this amazing bronze, very heavy deity that was sent from America. So we had the Abhishek here in the courtyard, and then the devotees had to carry that murti into the Samadhi. But when they got, because we know in the Samadhi it's a small area and the asana is very high, so about 20 devotees were carrying that murti of Srila Prabhupada, but nobody was strong enough to lift Prabhupada onto his asana. So what happened was Brahmananda, he got underneath the murti of Prabhupada, and by his powerful strength, because he realized when he was carrying Prabhupada when he was sick, he said, this is why Krishna has given me such a powerful body, so that I could carry Prabhupada, because no one else could do it. So then when Brahmananda got underneath the murti of Prabhupada, he actually lifted that murti up and put Prabhupada on his Vyasasana. And at that time, the hundreds and hundreds of devotees who had come from all over the world, they just roared. You'll never hear a roar like that in the whole world. They all roared with ecstasy that Prabhupada was finally established in his Samadhi. So up to the time, it didn't matter if Prabhupada was present, Prabhupada wasn't present. Brahmananda did the most amazing services for Prabhupada that nobody else in the movement was able to do. So we remember Brahmananda with such love. We had a lot of personal opportunity to serve Prabhupada, and Brahmananda was there most of the time as his secretary. But today we're just remembering the wonderful, no one else could do pastimes that Brahmananda did for Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
I first met Brahmanand Maharaj in Mayapur about 49 years back in 1972. Prabhupada called me for taking a second initiation to Mayapur. That time, Prabhupada invited his godbrothers for the lunch prasadam, and that hut you see near the gate, that hut was there. And I was standing, so Brahmanand Maharaj, he came, he was not knowing me, and he said, you cannot stand here. I said, why? He said, first of all you listen to me and then we'll talk further. That time I left, then Achyutanand Maharaj was knowing me, and I asked him, why did he say like that? He said, no, I will speak to him. He was not knowing that you are his god brother. And when they spoke, immediately Brahmananda Maharaj came and he said, please forgive me. He was sannyasi, but so humble that he said, please forgive me. And whenever we will meet, he will remember that incident. In London, when Srila Prabhupada was very weak, he came in 77 there. I was at that time in Scotland. I came for Prabhupada darshan. There also, Maharaj met me, and he again recalled that incident at Mayapur. He said, Maharaj, don't embarrass me. I just took you as a special case, and being a sannyasi, God brother, you tried to correct me. He said, no, it was my fault, and I cannot forget that incident. Then also, in London, I asked Srila Prabhupada, as we mentioned about the Guru Tattva, I was given service to prepare his medicine. And one day, Hariswari Prabhu was his servant, and he said, no, don't worry, I will make medicine for Prabhupada, I know how to make. Next day at Guru Puja time, one devotee came and he said, Prabhupada is calling you in his room. I went there, he said, where's my medicine? So I said, Hariswari Prabhu said he is going to make it. He said, no, you were given the responsibility of making medicine. So why did you give your duty to Hariswari Prabhu? Then Hariswari said, I said, Prabhupada, I know you are weak, we don't want to disturb you, but our big God brothers don't allow to come and to give you medicine as well. He said, no, allow Niranjan to can always to give my medicine. So I spoke to Brahmananda Maharaj, he said, no, you are right, and nobody will stop you to administering medicine to Srila Prabhupada. And one story, Maharaj said that in the early days, Prabhupada was not having wristwatch. Prabhupada was seeing that round watch. So devotees thought that why Prabhupada is not using the wristwatch? It must be material. So what they did, they all threw their wristwatch and bought that round watch that Prabhupada is using that. So Maharaj said, we were not having even money to buy round watch. I had to borrow money from my parents. And when we came to Vrindavan, I was still meeting him. He will talk to me and particularly about the translation work. And I said some of the translation is not proper as Prabhupada wanted into Hindi. So I said, okay, you tell me those verses, and although I don't know Hindi, but I will try to send them to BBT and see that they get them corrected. Last time, just when we were celebrating our 50th anniversary, in 1975, I met him, and again in one lecture I asked one his question. Prabhupada wrote in his poem, MV Jaldut. So I said, what does it mean, MV? So he said, those days in Scindia's steam navigation company, there was a master vessel. Some ships were allocated as a master vessel. So Srila Prabhupada is mentioning that MV for Jaladut, because Jaladut was taken as master vessel. And just after 2 months, he entered into the pastimes of Radha Shyamsundar Krishna Balaram. I was not here, I was at my place at Chitrakoot when we heard. We were very sorry about that, but we knew that in serving Srila Prabhupada, he was number one, and for him, doing Srila Prabhupada, as Devi Shakti MATAJI said, he could do anything to protect him. In fact, as Krishna does not need protection, but Nanda Baba and Jashoda Maiya were worried. Similarly, all the devotees, at the first incident, as they stole Srila Prabhupada from the hospital, that was also showing his concern for Srila Prabhupada. So I think I again offer my obeisances to my most beloved God brother Brahmananda Maharaj, and I hope that he will be serving Srila Prabhupada somewhere or other as he did in this planet. Brahmananda Maharaj ki jai.
Brahmananda Prabhu ki jai. So in the last 5 years of Brahmananda Prabhu's life here in Vrindavan, I was asked to become a caregiver for Brahmananda because his health was declining. And we developed a very wonderful friendship. Of course, he was my esteemed godbrother. And the service started to entail more things than just medical care, but we used to arrange programs for Brahmananda in the Balaram Hall, in his home. Many times we'd have devotees would be visiting around the world, and we'd invite the devotees to come into Brahmananda's room, and he had his chair, his preaching chair. So devotees would come and we would listen to so many stories, and there was a feeling when Brahmananda Prabhu would speak, you could instantly feel Prabhupada's presence, because Brahmananda was always talking about Srila Prabhupada, and because of his intimate association with Prabhupada, you felt that intimacy. Vyasaki Prabhu was talking about when they got excommunicated, and Brahmananda used to tell some stories when they were on the road that the four of them, three of them would hide behind the bushes, and one of them would come out and hitchhike. And so the car would stop, and all four of them would run into the car with their sannyastiks, and they'd have to put their sannyastiks horizontally on the chair. Sometimes he said the driver would make them get out, but sometimes the driver was just so astonished that this had happened that he would take them. And he could see they were holy men. The driver could see they were somewhat holy men in the way that they were dressed. And they would preach to the drivers as they got different rides to wherever they were going. And in Ann Arbor, when they met Keith or Indradumna Maharaj, or was it Brian? Keith or Brian was his old name. And Brahmananda was speaking, Gargamuni was cooking, and Vishnu John Mara was singing, and the other one, Subal, he was attracting people to come over and listen and eat prasadam. So one time when Keith or Brian, I forget what Maharaj's name was before, he said, I have some money, maybe we could have a little program in my house. And he, come over for an hour or two, and Gargamuni's ears went up, and he said, oh, how much money do you have? Because we haven't eaten very much lately. So Indradumna Maharaj gave him maybe $50 or something, and they immediately took that, went out and bought a lot of different bhoga, and they just took over the house, and they ended up staying for quite a few weeks, and in that way, Indradumna Maharaj was totally mesmerized by prasadam, by the philosophy, and by the singing. And they continued in that way all the way down from Michigan, hitchhiking, doing little programs at universities, and all the way down to Florida, which is one of the southernmost states of America. And Brahmananda described that on the way they were receiving letters from Srila Prabhupada. You can look this up in the letter archives. And Prabhupada was praising them, that this is the real life of sannyasi, that you go from here to there. They literally were sleeping under trees if they couldn't find a place to live. Can you imagine these four sannyasis with their sticks propped up against a tree in some park, and sleeping under the trees, preaching whatever they could get, bhiksham dehi, they would get a little money, and they would literally take that money and make it into a feast, and then invite people who were walking by to come by and partake the prasadam and the kirtan. So, and then what DAIVI Shakti was referring to, a couple of times Prabhupada was in the hospital, and specifically one time Brahmananda and Gargamuni, they wanted to do some spinal tap on Prabhupada with a big needle, and Prabhupada had said, no needle, no needle. So at this point, when the nurse came in with the needle, Prabhupada immediately turned to Gargamuni and said, get me out of here. And so Gargamuni literally took the bed, and Brahmananda used to tell the story, and how Prabhupada was sitting on the bed like this, chanting, and Gargamuni was pushing the bed out to the elevator, and the doctors and nurses were saying, you'll be the death of that old man. Gargamuni was only 17 at that time, and Brahmananda was 20, 21, 4 years apart. And but they kept going, and Brahmananda had the getaway car at the exit door, and they stopped the bed. Gargamuni picked him up and put him in the car, and then that's when Prabhupada went and rested at that beach house in Stinson Beach. And Prabhupada said that the hospitals, you go to the hospitals if it's very serious, but most of the time if you go to the hospital, you can become more sick, or they do some experiment. He used this term, experiment. So it was about 2 weeks before, I was going to tell the story of the medical visa. Brahmananda, of course, couldn't go back to America to get his visa. He would have taken up 2 seats, and he couldn't get in the bathroom. So in order to get the medical visa at that time, which was, let's see, it's been 5 years since Brahmananda left us, so that must have been 6 years. You had to get the permission from American Embassy, and then you had to go to Mathura for the 3 CMOs, chief medical officers. You had to get a lot of paperwork all lined up. So I went around and did this, and went to Mathura, and the chief medical officer, all 3 of them, Krishna arranged for them to be in the same room at the same time, which is very unusual. Usually there's one there, one there. So I was showing them the pictures of Brahmananda with his oxygen mask on and how large he was, and I had gone to the doctor and gotten a whole list of medical problems, which were all true. And he said, one of them said, well, let's go and see him. And I said, yes, if you could give this medical visa, this man is very saintly, and you and your whole family will benefit by serving this saintly man. So they said, okay, let's go, cello. So all 3 of them got into their car, and I got into an auto rickshaw, and we're following them to the Ananda Krishnavan, where Brahmananda lived for 15 years almost. He lived in Vrindavan before he left. And so I got on the phone with Brahmananda. I said, they're coming, the CMOs are coming, so get into your bed and put the oxygen machine on. And Brahmananda was saying, okay, and he was really, really getting into the drama of it. So we come to the door, and the 3 Indian medical officers were knocking on the door, and I opened up the door, and they're all leaning in, and it was dark, and they saw this huge shape on the bed. And I said, Brahmananda, can we turn the light on? So I turned the light on, and you could see 6 eyes, just like, because he was really huge when he was lying down, and he had the oxygen machine on his face. And so I says, sirs, you can sit down. And they were saying, Mr. Sharav, can you hear us, Mr. Sharav? And he was going, he was kind of really playing it up, And then, so he said, this man, he cannot travel. Immediately, right on the spot, they gave the medical visa. And then that way, Brahmananda could stay longer without having to leave Vrindavan. And he told me many times, he told Gargamuni many times, if I ever get sick, don't let them take me out of Vrindavan. So on his last day, we were with him from about 3 a.m. in the morning till about 3, he left at about 3:20 in the afternoon on that sacred day of Vakreshwara Pandit's appearance day. And as it's been mentioned, there's actually, Prabhupada talks from the Vyasasana in New York in 72, and he mentions that Brahmananda, he was my first dancer in Tompkins Square Park. So that Brahmananda left on that day of the appearance of Vakreshwara Pandit is very significant, in that Brahmananda was the first dancer. So he had some fall that day, and he had a big gash in his head. There was blood everywhere. Gargamuni was a little freaked out. He called me at 3 a.m., please come, please come. So I came, we cleaned up the blood, but we couldn't lift him up. So I called Brahmananda Prabhu and Saranga Thakur, and immediately all these brahmacharis came, and it took about 8 of us to lift him up and put him in his preaching chair. And he was very groggy, but he was conscious. But then his breathing, the oxygen machine, for some reason wasn't working properly that day. And he was just taking gas and Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. and just gasping like that. And Saranga Thakur offered him a juice, and Dharmatma and myself, and we were all just trying to give him some relief. I remember massaging his feet. They had really swollen. And someone had called an ambulance from Delhi to come. But remember, he didn't want to leave Vrindavan, and Prabhupada, as DAIVI Shakti indicated before, had told him, so you will not have to go to hospital either. And so they came in, these two little very skinny Indian men with this little cot that was maybe 5 inches wide, and here's this huge man. At that time he was 350 pounds, I think. And they were so bewildered, they didn't know what to do, and you could see Gargamuni and I were looking at each other saying, see, Krishna's going to keep him here. And so up until his last breath, he was saying Prabhupada's name. And then in his preaching chair, which is considered to be very, very auspicious when you leave from the place where you preach, and he just fell over and left. It was very, very amazing, very incredible, and all of us, we were all checking to see if he actually had left. And the managers at this place, Ananda Krishnavan, they had become very attached to Brahmananda. He was very affectionate to even the doctor who had gotten the medical reports from. He used to come and visit Brahmananda. The chief officer of Ramakrishna Mission used to come and visit him. Brahmananda had a very charming way about him, even with the so-called non-devotees. And that night they cleaned with cow urine, cow dung, this beautiful place in the Ananda Krishnavan, and they put Brahmananda's body there. The men came and bathed him very nicely, and they had all-night kirtan. And then in the morning, a bullock cart came, and the bullock cart was decorated so nicely. It was beautiful, beautiful, beautiful flowers. And again, it took, I don't know, at least 15 men to bring him over, but everybody was rushing forward, even if they just could offer a finger to help with that service, and putting him on the bullock cart and taking Brahmananda to Jamuna, and everybody was allowed to participate in Brahmananda's last rites at the Jamuna. And his body took a while to burn, but in that time, the sweetest kirtans, most sweet kirtans, and cows were coming, brahmanas were coming, all the auspicious signs that a great personality had departed from this world. So I'm very indebted to Brahmananda Prabhu and to Gargamuni Prabhu for all the amazing service they gave to Prabhupada. They came from a very wealthy family, and the father was going to leave them at that time several $1 million, which at that time was a lot of money. But the father said to them after they met Prabhupada, he was Swamiji at the time, the Swamiji or me? And Brahmananda, Gargamuni, didn't know what to say. He was a little afraid of his father, but Brahmananda immediately said, the Swamiji, my dear father, my dear demoniac father. And so they went back to, and so immediately the father said, you are out. You are nothing in the will. You do not have a home. Do not ever come back to this house. They lived in a big, huge mansion. And then they had chosen sleeping on the floor, eating, at that time they were eating watermelon rinds and serving Prabhupada. So they went back to Swamiji, to Prabhupada, and said, Prabhupada, we wanted to give you that money, and we don't have a father now, we have no family, but we just want to stay with you. And Brahmananda, when he would tell this story, just tears would come from his eyes. And he said, Prabhupada, he took them both in his arms like this, and he said, I will be your father. I will protect you always. And that way, they both really accepted that position as being Prabhupada's eternal sons, and Prabhupada being their father. And as we all feel as well, Prabhupada is our real father. He's given us everything and more than what any, material father can give. So, Jai Brahmananda, Jai Srila Prabhupada.
To West Pakistan, as Devi Shakti Mataji was telling, to answer the challenge of Arya Samaji, Garga Muni, Prabhupada used to say, Garga Mani. He had a money, so he flew there to Dhaka. But Brahmanand has to come from the Iran to Afghanistan, then by road to Punjab. And in Punjab University, he wanted to preach, and he was not knowing what is Pakistan, and people literally spit in his face. So he came to Karachi. And he had only one book at that time, Krishna, the Reservoir of Pleasure, black and white. And he went into a Hindu, very poor community, which at that time was named Rangiwada, and afterward we called that place Kirtan Anand Colony, because that was the place he did the Kirtan. It was 71. I was in Karachi in 71 at that time after my 12th and waiting for my admission in medical. And he showed the seed there, and we are the fruit that we become devotee by his preaching in Pakistan. Yeah, it's not that he went there and nothing happened. He sowed the seed. And that book I got there in that colony, and I used to preach in that colony afterwards. And then those poor people, really poor people, they were doing the leather work, making the shoes. They give him at that time money like 1 rupee, and that was his fare to come back during the war, 71 back. And yesterday just I met Garga Muni. He told that I also went to the Karachi, but I was preaching in university and he was preaching to the Hindu community. So Brahmanand's preaching, as Prabhupada said, anybody who preaches in Muslim countries is very dear to me, and he has done that. He has done that work there. It was very difficult, even it's very difficult to preach there at that time. Definitely it was, and then war started. So this was the really seed sown by Brahmanand in Karachi, and then we have now more than 14 centers in Pakistan now. Krishna conscious centers, and maybe 200-300 devotees initiated. Yeah, and then the one lesson we have to learn from teaching of Srila Prabhupada to Brahmanand. That Brahmanand, when was president in Nairobi, Srila Prabhupada went there, and then he asked, what about account? He said, there's no account. All these Hindus are so wealthy and they are so pious, they are giving everything, and temple is running. Prabhupada said, no, they are already devotee. We have to preach to the locals. We have to preach to the locals. This is the message really from Brahmananda. I realized that we have to preach to the people who are out of the Vedic Sanatan purview. Prabhupada said they are already devotees. They have a small curtain that can be removed any time. But preach to those who are out. Then Brahmananda started preaching to the Nairobian local people. And here only the solace for me, when I saw Brahmanand, I said, anyway, I am not that fat, so I am happy. They are my big uncles, no problem. I have 2 big uncles, so I am not afraid of this big weight. And I used to tell at that time to Amog Lila preaching in Karachi, bring the sleeping bag of Brahmanand for me, that I can only fit in his sleeping bag. But when he came here, at that time in a Gurukul building, there was one office I was managing at that time. So at that time, Brahmananda Prabhu went at that time to South India for treatment, and he lost some weight. And he came to Sarvama. He said, Sarvama, I can pay now obeisances. And he full Dandvat Pranam. He did full Dandvat Pranam. He said, I can pay now obeisance, see? And then he embraced me. Oh, he said, can you reach me? Can you reach me now? He was so... And then he was... in Prabhupada's Disappearance Day festival, he was standing as a guard on the gate, not allowing anybody to go in. Every time we have that same system, some people come, but the main time nobody can go in. I just walked in. He said, yeah, go in. He said, go in. And then we were managing Kumbh Mela in 2001. He once there, Dinabandhu Prabhu, when we were sitting, he came. He said, all your tent we will secure. We will secure your tents in the Kumbh Mela. You have to pay 10,000 rupees. We are there to guard. So the whole idea is that the other things which I was supposed to say, already DAIVI SHAKTI Mataji said, so I don't want to repeat anything. But as she said, again I am repeating the things which nobody was able to do for Prabhupada, Brahmanand was there to do. And Prabhupada said he can give his life for me, and he did that. And he was ready to do that all the times. So we are really, I am particularly very much blessed that he came to Pakistan and the movement started in 72. Then we got the whole news from England. One friend, our doctor, who was in England, he came to, he told me what is going on in ISKCON, but somehow the time was lapping. But this is a wonderful nature of Brahmananda. All the time when he was here, always we were bumping and talking. And on this, his holy appearance day in Vrindavan, it means they were determined to be Krishna conscious, and they were the Prabhupada's men, and he was Prabhupada's man, and he went to the Prabhupada. Hare Krishna. Brahmananda Prabhu ki jai.
Hare Krishna. Jai Banchaka Bhatrabhyascha Kripa Sindhiveva Patitanam Pavanabhyo Vaishnavabhyo Namo Namo. So, and of course, I will consider that I'm one of the products of Brahmananda Prabhu. You know, because that time he was a Swami preaching in Africa. Because after he came from Pakistan when the war was going on. And Srila Prabhupada, when he got message from Brahmananda Prabhu that can I come back to India? And so Srila Prabhupada was very, very anxious that yes, we should immediately come back to India. And then when Brahmananda Prabhu, when he arrived back in Bombay, and then Srila Prabhupada sent him to Africa. This was 1971, around the mid-71. This was the time that he went to Africa. This time, this was East Africa, Nairobi, because there was a big community of Indians, Gujaratis, in Kenya that time. And of course, Gujarati, of course, they were very, very pious Indian people. They naturally, worship, Krishna. So, but of course, Srila Prabhupada first came to East Africa in 1972, after Brahmananda Prabhu had established the ISKCON there. Now, when the programs was arranged for Prabhupada, mainly it was all the Indians. So Srila Prabhupada said that I did not come here to preach to the Indians. I come here to preach to the local Africans. If I want to preach to the Indians, I stay in India. So Srila Prabhupada did not do the preaching there. So immediately, devotees immediately they arrange a hall and invite all the Africans to come and preach. So in this way, the African preaching started. However, for many, many years, for a period of 4 or 5 years, from 1972 onwards, the preaching was not really that great in East Africa in respect to the African community. So they have a lot of problems getting the Africans to stay and remain devotees. Mostly they will come and then they will go. They don't stay as devotees. And also because of the kind of crowd that they were getting that time, not like they were not getting the most sophisticated Africans to preach. Mostly people from the street. They will come and join the temple, and after a few months, they will steal, and then they will leave. So this was the experience that was going on. So that time, the Brahmananda Prabhu, he had written Prabhupada about these difficulties of preaching in Africa, to preach to the Africans. So, expect these difficulties. So Srila Prabhupada wrote him back. He said that, go deep into Africa. Go deep into Africa, and I'm sure you will find a success. So because ISKCON preaching was limited to East Africa, which is basically Kenya, and of course the South African also started, but there was basically no Africans were really committed, no Africans were joining. So, and then Srila Prabhupada wrote this letter to Brahmanand that he should go deep into Africa. And then Brahmananda Prabhu, so he decided to go to West Africa. I'm from West Africa, by the way, from Nigeria. So he decided to go to West Africa, and by that time, Srila Prabhupada, he knew some Indian businessmen, some Patels, some Chanrai. This men, they have some big company, a lot of big companies in Nigeria. So Srila Prabhupada reaching them, saying that I'm going to send my disciple to Lagos, and I want you to assist him. I want you to assist. So in 1977, so Brahmananda Prabhu, he sent 2 devotees to Lagos, Nigeria, this Shamila and Jalakara Prabhu. So he sent them to go to Lagos and to start and distribute books, to start book distribution. So these devotees, this was towards the end of Prabhupada's leaving the planet, around October of 1977. So these 2 devotees, they came and they started book distribution. They were putting books in the library and also putting books, making life members, of course. So that's how I got the books when they were putting the books in the university library. And then the early 78, so Brahmananda Prabhu, he came to Nigeria. And of course, that time when, because many of you don't have, especially when it comes to the, Nigeria, Lagos, so Lagos especially, is a very, very dynamic city, It's basically the biggest cities in Africa, and there's always all kinds of sin, especially in the capital city. There's always all kind of crowd, every kind of sin is always there. So I remember one time I was just walking on one of the main road, and I saw a big crowd of people. They were gathering. So I was wondering, who are these people? Why are they gathering like this? Because Lagos, maybe some magicians or something is this there. So they were just gathering this crowd of people, and then I went there, and I saw. When I went close by, I first didn't see who was in the middle, but I saw some books and magazines were there. and I picked one of the magazine. It was a Back to Godhead magazine. So I picked it up, and this Back to Godhead magazine has a picture of an old Indian man. This was Prabhupada actually. So I was wondering, who are these? Who are these people? And then I was able to make it through the crowd, and I saw this big white man sitting. And approaching, I said that, what is this? This is the work of Satan. This is this work, because I was Muslims, and then I became a Christian, and because we've learned about the Satanists, and also we learned that a day will come when there'll be so much satanic, whatever it is. So I came closer and I asked him that, what is this? This is the work of Satan that you are doing, this and that, So he immediately told me that, okay, you just take this magazine, and then you can, take this magazine, go read it, and then you can, and then he gave me the address of the center, which was just opening up, in Nigeria. So in this way, I went home, read the magazine again. Of course, it was a totally different story. So, of course, how the movement actually began in Africa, especially in West Africa. There's one devotee colleague of mine, Brahmananda Prabhu, who had made like a 4 video series of how the movement began there. It was not an easy thing in the beginning, because when Brahmananda Prabhu came, and that time also, Srila Bhakti Maharaj also, he had also decided to come to Africa, to West Africa that time. So he came along with, in fact, for Brahmananda Bhakti Maharaj, he sent 2 devotees, was Ekandra Prabhu and another devotee, Murari Hari, to go and assist Brahmananda Prabhu in Lagos. And so that time, they only had one room, just one room, which means in that one room, because the room has been given by some Indian. So in that one room, there was Brahmananda Prabhu and these 2 devotees, they all stay in the room together. They all stay in the room. And then from there, but the room was also filled with books. So there was actually hardly, so much space there. And then from there, they will go out all day long and distribute books. So in this way, the movement, started in West Africa. And since that time, I would say there was no looking back, because the West Africans, they are unlike other parts of Africa, because the West African people, they are very, very highly intelligent, very, very highly intellectuals. So when they, when they see a book, they want to get more and more books. So in this way, when the movement came, it became very successful in West Africa. Because like Prabhupada told Brahmananda that you go into deeper Africa, because they were having problems in East Africa. He said, you go deeper into Africa, I'm sure you will find your success there. So when he came to West Africa, so it was totally different. In this way, many people became attracted, and then they became, so the movement became very vibrant. A lot of devotees. So actually, up to today, which means the 1 out of 2 black-body devotees in the ISKCON society today, are from West Africa, basically. And I remember it was a few years ago. Actually, for many years, I was his secretary for many years. For about a period of 6-7 years, I was Brahmananda Prabhu's secretary. So, and then when I was in West Africa 6 years ago, in 2015, so I got a message that, at that time, devotees have gathered. There was a gathering of devotees. They were having a festival. And I got a message from India that Brahmananda Prabhu had just passed away. So immediately we had to organize a program. And of course, I did the speaking of how that basically Brahmananda Prabhu was the main reason why ISKCON is in West Africa. because he was the main bedrock of the movement in Africa, especially West Africa. Actually, for the whole of Africa, he was the main bedrock, because taking Prabhupada's order, starting, and it wasn't easy. It was not an easy thing. It wasn't easy thing in the beginning. There was so much difficulty that was there. A lot of difficulty was there, but he tolerated all this difficulty, especially, being a white-body person, and he placed so many mosquitoes. It was not easy, But he had to tolerate all the difficulties just to be able to establish the mission of Chaitanya Prabhu in Africa. So therefore, even though many people may not know, but many of us who came in the early days, so we know that yes, without him, there'd be no Krishna consciousness in Africa without him. So he made things possible. And that's why we always remain eternally grateful to him. Okay. So thank you very much. So Brahmananda Prabhu ki, Srila Prabhupada ki.